Afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Angie Jackson, and I am the Associate Vice President for Development here at Berkeley School of Theology. We are so absolutely delighted that you have joined this premiere event of BST's First Friday Lunch and Learn series. Please introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already done so. And if you haven't yet muted yourself, we would invite you to do that for now until we open the floor for questions a little later. Also, no matter where you are or what time it is for you, we want to invite you to feel free to enjoy a meal or a snack. That's why we call it Lunch and Learn. This series is sponsored by and planned by the Alumni Engagement Office. Melissa LeBeouf, will you raise your hand? Assistant Director of Alumni and Donor Engagement is co-hosting with me today. She will be watching for your questions during the Q&A time, and she is your source of information about future events. She has all the news you can use, so thanks, Melissa, for doing that. It looks like we have a diverse representation of the BST community here with us today. I see administrators, faculty, staff, alumni, trustees, students, old friends, and some new friends. Welcome. I will also say that we have someone from the class of 1957 sitting down in the center with Dr. Evans today. So welcome, sir. We are so glad you're with us.
Really are.
These Lunch and Learns have been designed with three purposes in mind: learning, connecting, and being. Each month will feature a different topic and a new guest. And our hope is that topics will stretch and challenge our minds, that we will connect and reconnect with others in the BST network, and that this will be a space of radical belonging. We are planning for great variety and rich conversations in the months to come. Today, our guest is the Reverend Dr. Joseph Evans. Dr. Evans is the J.Alfred Smith Senior Endowed Professor of Theology in the Public Square and the Director of BST's Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. He is a former pastor of the First Baptist Church, Huntington, West Virginia, and the Mount Carmel Baptist Church of Washington, D.C. Prior to coming to BST, Dr. Evans was the recent dean of the Morehouse School of Religion at the Interdenominational Theological Center and the interim pastor of Friendship Baptist Church, both in Atlanta, Georgia. He has published 4 books. They are Reconciliation and Reparation, Preaching Economic Justice, The Most Eloquent Man, Gardner Taylor and the Art of Sacred Rhetoric, The Polished King, Living Words of Martin Luther King Jr., and Lifting the Veil Over Eurocentrism, the Du Boisian hermeneutic of double consciousness. Dr. Evans is an inductee into the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. College of Preachers and the Morehouse College Colloquium of Scholars. Gardner Taylor once said of him that he was one of the brilliant preachers of his generation. And Wyatt T. Walker said he is a master craftsman who is extremely adept in understanding how to prepare and deliver the prophetic sermon. Dr. Evans is married to Patricia Lewis Evans, and they have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. We are in for a treat today. I will tell you that Dr. Evans has requested that we do today's presentation interview style. So we will spend the next 30 minutes or so in dialogue together. And during that time, I invite you to think about questions that come to your mind as he shares with us. And we will open the floor for about 15 minutes of Q&A towards the end of our time. So let's get to it. Dr. Evans, are you ready?
I'm ready, Dr. Jackson.
You're ready. Okay. All right. So 2 weeks ago today, in fact, you were installed as BST's first ever endowed professor, the J.Alfred Smith Senior Professor of Theology in the Public Square. I'm curious, what does that mean to you personally? And what do you think it means for BST as a school?
It's a very good question. Let me first of all thank you, Dr. Jackson, for hosting us. And I want to thank Melissa for doing a lot of the work to make this possible. I want to take your question, quite frankly, head on. 2 weeks ago, you're right, we did an installation. And since then, the significance of what we are engaged in, that is an endowed chair, has become even more of a reality. So I suppose you're getting at, why would I leave Atlanta, Georgia, in the middle of the Atlanta University Center and the dean's role at Morehouse and come to the West Coast? And I think I can answer it this way and maybe drill down more closely to what you're asking me. On the first hand, I was invited to consider the position. I was aware of the advertisement for the J.Alfred Smith Chair, but at the time, it didn't seem as though I would be able to respond. When I was asked to consider it, we prayed and thought through it. We asked several questions, and then we decided to make application. Now, we did that because in our research, we looked at the institution. We looked at the presidency. Dr. Jim Brenneman is a very astute scholar and a great leader. That was very important. Leadership matters, as all of us know. We looked at the academic officer and in Dr. Leanne Snow Fletcher, whom I knew by reputation, and I've read some of her work. The trustees, I looked at the trustees to see who was helping to set policy for the institution. I knew some of the faculty members, but I also looked at the faculty and realized it was extremely strong and brilliant people who were leading the students in learning. And then, of course, you had some quality students, and you'll have more. And then you have a very good BST community. I know that. I did my homework and found that people who are part of BST loves their institution. So I'm really looking at the alumni and alumni and how they support the institution. And to be very honest, I thought about how Dr. Jeffrey Havgray over at the Home Mission Society, what would his role be, and his development officer in respect to Vincent Dent. All of those people I interviewed before I was interviewed in respect to coming to the institution. Finally, or when you think of an endowed chair, and I'm going to be very candid, there are not a lot of endowed chairs in theological education. And there are fewer where Black men are asked to respond, and more narrowly, an endowed chair named after one of the great preachers and theologians of our time, in the person of J.Alfred Smith Sr. Dr. Smith, I met at an Academy of Homiletics meeting. Now, I had heard him preach many times, to be honest. I'd heard him at the Progressive National Baptist Convention. I heard him at the Hampton Ministers Conference. But you don't really get that close to them, at least not in those days. You'd see them up on the platform, and at best you could say, I heard him today. But at Claremont, and I think it was like 1997 or 1998. I can't remember, but it was my first Academy of Homiletics meeting, and I was there, and I looked up, and there was Dr. J.Alfred Smith kind of standing there by himself. And so I went over and spoke to him, and he was as warm as you can imagine. I couldn't believe how warm he was toward a young fellow who, you know, had an Ebony magazine with the 15 greatest Black preachers in it. And of course, Dr. Smith's picture was in there. By the way, Dr. Jackson, he has signed that for me since then, I want you to know. And you know, he means a lot to not only the ABC community, but to the African-American community at large. He's known from Oakland, California to Ocala, Florida. I mean, he's known across the nation as one of the esteemed preachers. And so I consider the call to Berkeley School of Theology as a privileged responsibility to serve in this capacity. So, you know, if you put all those things together with the blessings of my family to make this transition to come, I think it was the right thing to do. And finally, I think it's also important to say that the work that we are engaged in here at BST is significant. And we have rhetorical space, you know, on the West Coast, we have rhetorical space, I think, to lead in scholarship that may not be as agile on the East Coast, because there's a lot of noise. You know, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but there's just a lot of institutions saying a lot of things. But I think because of where we are located here in Berkeley and in California, we have the opportunity because of the reasons I mentioned, whether it's the faculty, the students, the trustees, the alumni, the community, the president, the chief academic officer, on and on and on, and the support of the community here. I think we can say things prophetically and even priestly at times that will influence the rest of the theological landscape. And I also think that we can influence from this post, you know, a lot of things that we'll be able to do. We'll literally be able to also share with our American Baptist churches, colleges, right? It's not just a theological institution that we have opportunity to share our ideas and vision with, but also with an entire family.
Right. Thank you. Tell us a little bit for those who aren't clear. So you're a professor, and this professorship is it's focused on theology in the public square. Tell us, what does it mean to you to do public theology? And who else has a role in public theology?
Well, so I come from a tradition of public theologians, right? I mean, that I do know, but I think I would begin just very quickly to say that public theology is to shape moral and ethical opinions in the public. And that can be done from pulpit. It can be done from writing editorials, writing journal articles, and appearing in spaces where she or he, in this case, he will get a hearing. But I do come from public theologian tradition, whether it is Fannie Lou Hamer, whether it is Wyatt T. Walker, whether it is, of course, Martin Luther King, who the one most people would probably know. I think it is fair to say that that type of theology is not as dogmatic as maybe some of our denominational theological motifs. But the difference is, and I want to segue again, because the difference is there are public theologians from traditions in the Christian, under the Christian umbrella, that are very assertive and very aggressive in swaying people to their positions that perhaps many of us on this at this meeting at this time would not agree with. So we're not the only ones in the public square making efforts to share an ethical and a moral position. What is different about what we do not stand on the side of empire. We do not stand on the side of imperialism. Instead, our public theology is to stand against oppression. Our stance is to advocate on behalf of those who cannot speak for her or himself. What we do is intend to be precise with liberation motifs. And I don't know how deeply to get into it, but we probably need to talk about what we understood as liberation theology, which I kind of grew up on, and it still has its place. But theology is also at this time, as people like J.D. Otis Roberts and others would call, a political theology, which means we have to understand if we're in a political circumstances, conditions, then we have to have a theology that responds to that condition, to that context. That's the word I'm looking for. And so we have to decide, what are we to advocate for or for against? And so I would advocate for the eradication of racism and the abolishment of poverty. Those two issues continually to plague those of us of goodwill and good faith. And if we can solve those two things, I think the other isms are easier to approach. But unless we deal with those nominal two immoral positions that people take against fellow human beings, I don't know how far we're going to go. And so I think that is a point of departure, the raison d'etre for us, is to focus on issues that we can build consensus around rather easily, because most people understand that racism is an ill. The nation, and prior to the nation being founded, and a colonialism, I'll call it invention, that intersects with politics, racism, and economics. If we can solve the economic interest in racism, or the economic interest, frankly, in poverty, then we are able to address other things. So that's how I see public theology coming in. We have obviously more definitions that we can use, but we want you to take the courses, and then you come take the courses, and then we'll be able to break it down even further. So you can use those definitions in your sights, sounds, and smells, and your zip codes. But for now, in general, we stand against oppression by any oppressor.
Okay, that's really helpful. And I think it takes us to a place where I can transition a little bit into the other role that you have at BST. So not only this professorship, this endowed professorship in public theology, but you are the inaugural director of BST's Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. Now, you started to do it just a minute ago. I think you started to go there, and you didn't quite go all the way. But will you help us make some of those connections between public theology as, say, an academic discipline, right, and the practical work that's needed to pursue truth, racial healing, and restorative justice?
I'm glad you asked that question. That's a good question. So let me begin with what I call the 4 A's. Everybody on this at this meeting, I believe, probably was in pursuit of A's in school, except me. I wasn't in pursuit of A's. I would settle for a B. That's what my dad asked, and I could play football. I tried to get B's. But over time, I thought, well, maybe I should try to get the A's because, okay, I pressed that far enough as a segue. But let's start with 4A's. There are 4A's that really describe the work we're doing in our new center. The first A is alignment. Now, we have to align with the mission and vision statement of BST, right? This center is a part of the Berkeley School of Theology, so we're not operating on an island unto ourselves. We are a part of a larger vision, interwoven like a chain stitch into what my Aunt Edith would call the chain stitch into her Afghans she used to make and the things she would send to us. And so there's a thematic theme that goes through our work. And so that is transparency with any persons or otherwise, wanting to work with us, that we have to tell them that this is what we work in. We work in the context of the larger community of BST. And we also have liabilities because there may be some things that they want to work on and they think are important that we cannot do, depending on myriad of things. That being said, that's the transparency part. Now, the second one is awareness. The center will be able, is Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, I wanted to use woke, but that didn't go with my A's. But you get it. It's awake. It's woke. We want everyone to be woke around here. We want people to understand that the issues that we want to address are issues that people who are sitting in your congregations on Sunday morning, they don't really stop thinking about those things for that hour and a half when they come to service. They may not tell you, but trust me, whatever the issues are, they are aware of it. And they're looking for pulpiteers to address them from time to time. And so we want to be made aware of what's going on around us. For example, think about immigration policies. Immigration policies actually intersect with incarceration policies. When we consider the immigration that I'm sure all of us are concerned about, particularly if we think about what's going on the border, it is horrific and horrifying to see in the United States of America that is placarded across the globe our sense of democracy and fairness, and we are willing to separate mothers from their children. Who does that? Who separates mothers from their children? So let's use a little, let's use an example. Perhaps this will help us to see it if you're not there yet. So here we are in Berkeley, California, and Berkeley is a pretty swank town here, from what I can tell. And everyone here seems to be alert to things going on around them. Let's say if we go down here on, no, we'll just go over here on Durant. It's just out here ways. If you and I were here with me, you could probably take a rock and almost throw it down to Durant if you're still young. You could probably toss it down there. That's how close we are. And the hustle and bustle going up and down Durant is interesting to watch. And let us say a young lady is walking there with one of her babies in a stroller, and she's clearly a part of this community. And the enforcement officers pull up, and they get out of the car, and they take the baby from the mother. No explanation per se, but there's some policy that she was on the wrong side of the street or whatnot. Something happened. And they take her baby. Now, everyone on this Zoom call would be horrified. Everybody would, what are you doing? But if you take that same scenario, you should have the same outrage on the border that somebody takes a baby from their mother. That is absolutely immoral. That's an issue that we should be aware of. But it's also connected to incarceration, because the African-American workforce oftentimes are construction workers, the blue-collar workers, and we're very proud of that because I come from a blue-collar family. I come from a union family, if you want to know the truth. And so I can see the world through that lens. Well, The prison industrial complex has been so successful in putting African-American males in behind bars that many of the positions that our economic system would have needed them for, they're not here.
Mm.
And so there's a connection there. I was walking out Telegraph today and I saw some lewd advertisement. I see it every day. And I wonder why it's there. Well, it's called, it's an environmental issue and an economic issue. If you live in certain communities, you don't have the power to stop people from putting up advertisements that are rude, lewd, enticing your children. How would you like your child to get up in the morning and you say, okay, little Sally, little Johnny, we're going to school today. I want you to do well. But before they can get on the school bus, they see negative images of themselves that basically tells them that they are dehumanized and they're not worth being educated. That's environmental terrorism, right? And so those types of connections makes us aware of the circumstances that we live in that are unethical and immoral. That's just some examples. We could go on, but I think that gives folks a good picture.
Okay, so there's 2 A's: alignment, awareness. What's the third A?
Thank you. The third one would be agency. We need to align people who have expertise in some of the things we just mentioned to help us work on position papers, workshops, things I'm not even thinking about now, to address those issues, because those are justice issues. That's public square concerns. And so we line people up with initiatives to help us do that. And then finally, we want to think of ourselves as a think tank. In other words, we want to give people access. We should be able to help people with access. So if someone calls us and says, hey, BST, Truth, Healing, Justice Center, right? How do we address these things in our communities? Like, for example, what if someone called us from some association in West Oakland, where the gentrification there is obvious from the last time I was here some years ago when Patricia and I were here and we were hanging out in West Oakland. We can see that the gentrification is even broader than when we were here just a few years ago. Or what about the issues in Russell City, where there are local grassroots folks who are doing everything they can to redeem some of the financial remuneration, to get financial remuneration for what has happened out there in Hayward. We should be able to address those issues and be able to come in alongside and aid local communities because it's the right thing to do. So nice. You got the 4 A's, Dr. Jack?
Repeat them for us. Just go down 1, 2, 3, 4. So
we begin with alignment, awareness, agency, and access. Very simple.
Awesome. Very good. Very good. So other people that are on Zoom may not be aware, but you are actually sitting in the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. And we can see some of the things that are on the wall in that room, but there are 3 other walls, of course. We see some portraits. I know there's some art and some other pieces. Tell us about that. Who are we seeing and why are they important? Why are they hanging in the center?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. And I'll be glad to. And when you all come here, and there'll be other opportunities when we're actually, have more cameras and so forth, where you can see around. But so I'm facing Oakland, and on the wall to my left, and what it appears, I assume would be your right, there's a photo here of Mother Jones. Mother Jones is on the wall, and many of you know that Mother Jones was a part of the labor movement in the turn of the 19th to the 20th centuries. She was in many ways a paradigm shifting person, dealing with people in coal camps. That was important to me because all of you all know about Mother's Day, right? And to ladies, soon be Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to you. But the original Mother's Day was actually set aside for Mother Jones. And Mother Jones also is from Grafton, West Virginia. And of course, I'm a West Virginian, so I've known about her all of my life. Directly behind me, you'll see in the center, I don't know if you can or not, but there's a photo of James Baldwin. That's self-explanatory. Baldwin's involvement in the civil rights movement and some of the most impressive letters ever written by any American writer. Fannie Lou Hamer is on the wall as well. Fannie Lou Hamer, of course, was an unheralded leader of the civil rights movement, particularly as a womanist. She would have certainly today be considered a womanist theologian. She was a brilliant speaker, an incredible courage, and I believe she warrants anyone's respect. And if you haven't seen Fannie Lou Hamer's America, that is on PBS, I urge you to watch it. You will come away both with tears as well as you'll literally stick your chin out with respect for the work she's done. When I was a little boy, I used to see Angela Davis on television. She had the big afro, and I was very much interested in what she was talking about. I didn't always understand what she was talking about because I was such a little kid, but I'll tell you what I did know. Because I'm Black in America, I knew that what they were saying about her wasn't true. And I'm talking about the media that characterized her. They did not tell us that she had a PhD from Brandeis. They told us that she was a radical person who was doing things out of line. They didn't tell us that. They didn't tell us that she was a professor here in California in the University of California system. They did not tell us that she was from Birmingham, Alabama, and that she was friends with two of the little girls that lost their lives in the 16th Street Church. And that terrorism, psychological terrorism, probably is what gave her the courage to face her fears. They did not tell us that Ronald Reagan took her professorial from her because he was using her as a political trope so that he could someday launch his presidency of the United States. And then, of course, Dr. King's here as well. I think, obviously, you know why he's here. He's one of the greatest leaders in history. And then we have a picture of Justice Ginsburg and Maya Angelou and a couple of other ladies on the wall here. And
all right. Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Yes. Are there individuals on the wall from other places in the world? And what might you say about those?
Which one are you thinking about?
You know which one I'm thinking about.
Well, I want you to say it.
On a wall that we can't see, there's a photo of Aung San Suu Kyi.
That's it.
Tell us why Suu Kyi is on the wall in the center.
Well, I'll tell you why. Because first of all, she represents the democratic idea of this country in a space where democracy is not respected in what we know today as Myanmar. And she took to the public square to advocate on behalf of the least of these. And I consider her one of the great leaders of our time. I must say this, however, I am disappointed in the United States for not supporting her. We started out supporting her, we celebrated her, but when people from her country and surrogates from other countries who were anti-democratic went into Myanmar, and she, of course, was out there on her own, and she's paid the ultimate price for that. And one of the things that is troubling about our country is we will get behind people, and at the appropriate time when they need us the most, if it's not in the interest of our policies on that particular day, we're not supportive. She deserves to be on the wall, and I admire her.
Thank you. It is exciting to think that the center will be working locally, yes, but will also be creating global awareness. And I understand that international partnerships are also one of the things that you are excited about launching through the center. Do you have anything to say about that?
I do. Thank you for asking. You did your homework, Dr. Jackson.
I try.
Yeah. So let's think about our response. And I think that's very important and timely to mention. The center is not just for local initiatives, as important as those are, but we have a global worldview. And for example, let's talk about one of our programs. So the Doctor of Ministry program. Our Doctor of Ministry program, to be very honest, is one of the strongest available, whether I was here or not. It just is. And we want to thank Dr. Sam Park, my colleague, for leading that DMIN program as its director. It's a very strong program that has an international vision. So when you consider that, then it makes it easier for me to say that we will have a doctorate of ministry cohort in conjunction with one of the premier liberation theologians in the world, in the person of Dr. Alan Bozak. And Dr. Bozak, in conjunction with the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and here at Berkeley School of Theology, we will lead a cohort which I can envision will be in perpetuity, and not only with South Africa, it will spread, frankly, to many other areas of the world, certainly other countries in Africa, and we believe other people groups and other nations. We will start the cohort, I think, we'll either be in September or January. I'm going to wait for the dean to weigh in on that. That's really her call and how she wants to do that. But she supports it, and our president supports it, and so it will happen. And what we will do, we will focus on the justice motifs, and we will learn to listen and see against our sight and our hearing. And one of the things Dr. Bozak told me privately is that one thing he can certainly offer us when we start talking about human justice issues, he said, we can certainly tell you what we did wrong. And there were two things he told me that they did wrong. One, they did not press for economic reparations directly and continue to do that. And secondly, they did not align the struggle in South Africa with the struggle in Palestine.
Interesting.
Two things he told me immediately. And
well, that's
but let me just say,
it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah. I think also we should say that the cohort we'll lead will be 6 men and 6 women. That's my price of admission. I don't want it, and we don't do that. And the reason I want to do that, well, I want to do it for a lot of reasons. But one reason is we will have that it creates a very dynamic cohort. Can you imagine 3 South African or 3 African women, 3 women from the States, 3 men from the States, 3 men from the African continent, more than likely from South Africa, and talking about justice motifs? Can you imagine the hermeneutic? Can you imagine the theology that comes out of that? Or even for that matter, just how one takes the hermeneutic and places it up on biblical text, whether it is the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament. Can you see how that would be one of the most dynamic opportunities to learn? I would like to be in that course myself, frankly.
I was going to say, you might convince me to do another degree, but we don't have time today for you to try to persuade me to do that. We need to shift right now to Q&A time. So we're going to give Dr. Evans a chance here to get a drink of water and pause. And I'm going to invite those of you that are in attendance today to raise your hand, either use the hand raising emoji or actually raise your physical hand. And we would love to have some interaction with Dr. Evans over the next 12 to 14 minutes. So who's going to be courageous and
We've already got a volunteer. Leslie Bowling Dyer raised her hand.
all right, very good. So Leslie, I invite you to unmute yourself and jump into the conversation.
So thank you so much for doing this. And this is really exciting. I'm a BST alum. I'm also currently a GTU doctoral student. And so this is a member of Allen Temple, ordained minister, and a mentee of Dr. Smith. So this is the intersection of BST and the center, and even just my own research and passions and vocational call is just it definitely is comes at that nexus. So I think I am so excited to hear about this center. I'm excited to hear some of the ways that you, Dr. Evans, have been able to consider the context in which this center is going to exist and your own role as the director and also professorship. So, and thank you for the really great questions. I think my question goes to the one of gender, because it's my work that I do as a doctoral student. And I think it comes in because I think I appreciate that racism and poverty are definitely issues that we can get consensus around more easily than gender. And I think my question is, how will gender, because when we talk about racism, we understand that the Black church in particular, as a tradition, has been highly populated by women, but has been organized around male authority, which is also similar to the way households are also structured. And so gender is one of those things that is the analysis that we bring to problems and to structures may already be populated with ideas that are androcentric. So even when we talk about economy, we're talking about, the bifurcation of the private sphere and the public sphere. The economy is the stuff that happens in the marketplace. And then what happens in households is considered like non-economic activity. Also happens to be the domain of women. And so I think so already when we start to use words like economy, we're already inviting an androcentric sort of understanding of the world. And so I think my question is, and I'm excited to hear about a cohort that will include women, but I think also what are the guardrails, or who are the conversation partners? What are the ways in which keeping gender, because even racism has its gender specific expressions, it's not one thing. How will you keep gender a part of the conversation in ways that provide for seeing those initiatives as really key places for the center to get behind and to understand in relation to the construct of gender?
Okay. So now you identified yourself as a PhD student?
Yes, sir. Doctoral candidate.
And so you're a candidate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to treat you as one. Would you offer some of your suggestions? What do you suggest to me that would be a way to do that? Since you approached it that way, I'm going to approach you that way.
That's fine. That is very fair. And I appreciate that. So yeah, I think the question of really, how do we hear women's voices and women's lived experience? And I think also, and so I think really foregrounding women, not just in, because I think even when you're in the academy, it is a place that it socializes you to think like a man oftentimes, and you lose, it can be a place where you lose your sense, your orientation around your lived experience. And so I would say foregrounding the lived experiences of women who are facing poverty, who are facing racism, and listening particularly to how gender is constructing their experiences in ways that are distinct from male experiences of racism or poverty. And so paying attention to how gender informs even the expression of those isms in one's daily existence. That would be just one.
Okay, give me a more concrete one.
A more concrete one. I think when we talk about, for example, when we
Let me
talk
help.
about,
Let me help.
yeah, go ahead, please
So
do.
you suggested I heard you say that hearing those stories is a good place to start.
Mhm.
Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I would agree with you. So one of the things that we will do is be very conscious of the stories. For example, I gave you stories of women here and their narratives that are on the wall. So we're very aware of pathology. Pathology leads to narrative and lived experience. And then we intersect those experiences with others to make commonality. And the Black church is probably light years ahead of the white church in gender issues. I always hear people talk about what the Black church is not doing, but the Black church has done some pretty good work. There's some work to be done. Now, don't get me twisted here. There are a lot of things that we haven't done. But we're pretty inclusive in respects, even in sexuality issues. You know, I used to take offense when people would tell me about what Black people should be doing about sexuality issues. And I was like, wait a minute, hold up. We got a whole lot of Black people in our churches that have sexual identities that are different than others. We just don't put them on blast because we don't want them to be mistreated twice for being Black and queer. So, but that being said, you're welcome to help us to figure that out, Dr. To-be. We'll take all of your suggestions and we'll put them out and see what you got with critique. All right, next question.
Who else has a question? Rick
Professor-
Nixon, I see that you have
Yeah.
your hand up. There we go. I invite you to unmute and
Well, just to fill the gap a little bit, I just was in Atlanta for the Alliance of Baptist Convocation, which focused on the abolition of policing and incarceration. It's very moving. And spent a day at the King Center on my free day. And I'm just wondering, is there a place in your work, in the work of the center, and in this work you're, you know, the ways in which King has been sacralized and sanitized? Is there a way, is it part of your project to reclaim what he really was as a public theologian who was advocating for so much more than what we have limited him to by making him a saint?
Well, the answer is yes. I think we are at a place now where we can talk honestly about all people and their efforts. My time in Atlanta, I spent a lot of time around people who knew him very personally. Not only at Morehouse School of Religion, but at Friendship Baptist Church. I mean, you could walk through Friendship any day of the week and people will be standing there talking about their days at school when Martin was walking on the campus. And so they knew him in a very different way. But I want to talk about, just for a moment, what I think you may be getting at, the sanitizing or desanitizing King, and I'm not sure exactly what you meant by that, but I will say, oftentimes I've talked in the past about the PBS sanitation of Dr. King, the highs of what he was sharing. But at the end of the day, Martin King was very unpopular by 1966 through 67, because Dr. King stood in Riverside Church and spoke against the Vietnam War. Dr. King also had come to the conclusion that without economic reparations, there would be no sense of democratic equality in this country. And so he advocated, and where do we go from here, chaos or community? And by the way, I digress to say that as early as 1963, and Y.T. Walker told me in private, and I think I may have written about it in something, that they all knew by 1955 that eventually they would have to fight for economic reparations to get to where they wanted to be. But Dr. King in 1963 spoke at Washington after getting out of the Birmingham jail. Think about what happened in 1963. They bombed the 16th Street Church. They put Martin in jail in Birmingham, and we got the letter from Birmingham jail out of it. And then they go to Washington and they have a successful speech on the Mall. I Have a Dream speech, they call it, where King talked about checks with insufficient funds. He was talking about economic reparations. We don't hear people talk about that. Now, J. Edgar Hoover in the crowd, they knew what he was talking about. No, none of them missed it. He comes back to Atlanta. He goes to a restaurant down on Auburn Avenue, and all of his cohorts are happy, including Andrew Young, who has spoken to me about this as recent as me coming here a couple of months ago. And he talked about the fact that Dr. King was sanguine, withdrawn. And Dr. Walker went to him and called him by his name, Mike. What's wrong? And he said to him, this is not going to end well, because the nation still is not aware of the democratic need for economic reparations. And so in 1967, from 63, March on Washington, 64, Civil Rights Bill, 65, voter rights. Between 65, 67, King is preparing for the Poor People's Campaign. Now he's trying to bring the white poor into the same orbit as blacks, whites not being honest to talk about the issue that they were in the same situation as black people. So he wants to get there, and he writes, where do we go from here? And King talks about the nation must have full employment or guaranteed income. Full employment or guaranteed income. Immediately, they understood that as redistribution of wealth. Incidentally, if you go back and look Chaos Community, there are 2 copyrights on those books. One was a copyright in 1967. The second one was 1968. Conceivably, King never saw his book published, brothers and sisters. He was gone. And I and others, including people like Andrew Young, they talk about Dr. King was killed precisely because he was getting the voice of poor whites also. And America was not ready for that kind of justice. Now, I don't know if that's exactly where you're going, Dr. Mixon, but that was some of what I wanted to talk about.
Well, in full disclosure,
That
not only was I at the Poor People's Campaign in Washington back in the day, but I was in Riverside Church when he made the Beyond Vietnam speech. I was young then. I was a college junior or sophomore, I think. But
that's incredible.
Well, but it's exactly that. I mean, it's
I think she's trying to cut us
that
off.
that powerful witness to theology in the public square that I think gets lost in the sanitation. So that's part of what motivates my question.
Thank you, Doc.
It's a great question.
You can come over here and talk at the
and
center, Doc. Get your stuff together. You'll be over here. All right,
we
go ahead,
need to
Dr.
get the
Jackson.
2 of you together in person. I see there's another question, but I have to apologize and say that it's time for us to transition. So if you still have questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Evans by email. We're going to share some links in the chat in just a moment, and his email is going to be on one of the pages that we share. So I have a couple of institutional announcements I'd like to make, and then I want to honor your time by keeping us to 1 hour today. So I just want to acknowledge and say that I'm grateful that President Brenneman has come to our Lunch and Learn today, and that Dean Snow Flesher has also been in attendance. So I'm grateful to the two of you for your leadership and your support. If you or anyone in the room is interested or know someone who's interested, Dr. Evans will be teaching a class on resistance rhetoric this fall at BST, and we would welcome auditors as well as folks who are doing degree programs here. Dr. Evans is also available for speaking and preaching in your churches and at your organizations. This Sunday, he'll be in the pulpit at Allen Temple in Oakland. If anyone is in the area and wants to worship at Allen Temple, Dr. Evans will be preaching Sunday. And then finally, the June 2nd, First Friday Lunch and Learn will be led by Dr. Eric Cias. Eric, maybe you can wave to everyone. On Friday, June 2nd, he'll be giving a preview to his summer class called Down the Rabbit Hole, Conspiracy Theories in the Bible, and that should be a lot of fun. So we invite you to come back in June for that. And then Dean Snow Flesher on July 7th will be giving a talk in our Lunch and Learn called 1619 or 1776, a theological response, which also will be a great conversation there in July. So I offer you just my profuse thanks and gratitude. I'm so grateful that you came and spent the hour with us today. It's been fun for me, and I hope you'll come back next month and the month after that, and so on, as we gather as a community to learn and share. So thanks again. Have a great Friday, and we will see you soon.